Welcome. My name is Bradley Flam. I'm the director of the Office of Sustainability here at Westchester University, and I'm very glad to welcome those of you who are here in person in 255A and B Sykes, and those of you who are joining us on Zoom today. We are pleased to co-sponsor the Sustainability Research and Practice Seminar with our colleagues in the Office for Research and Sponsored Programs, and with the Sustainability Council's Scholarly and Creative Activities Committee. We have a fantastic schedule of 12 presentations this semester. We're already in the third week. If you haven't yet seen a copy of the full program, those of you here in person can find and leave with a copy today. And those of you joining us online, you can find a full PDF version on the Office of Sustainability's website. So please plan to join us every Wednesday at noon. But today, we are very pleased to be welcoming Dr. Tom Pantazes. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming him to the Research and Practice Seminar.
Well, thank you very much. And just want to say shout out to the other folks in the Teaching and Learning Center who helped with all of our AI work at this point. So let me find my mouse and we will get going. All right. As we get started today, I do want to clarify what exactly is my expertise on this topic. As most of you know, I work in the Teaching and Learning Center, and we've been getting a lot of questions around generative AI. So to answer those questions, I and other folks in the Teaching and Learning Center have been spending a lot of time listening, reading, and watching about content about these topics. So everything I'm going to share with you today is coming from that work. I am not an expert in some of these topics that we're going to touch on, but I will be able to point you in the direction of some resources. And I expect that there's likely others that do have some expertise who may be here in the audience, either virtually or in person. And so I have left a little bit of time at the end for us to engage in some conversation and ask some questions and hopefully hear from some of those folks that may have some of that expertise. So that leads the question to, why am I here? And the short answer is that faculty asked. At the beginning of the fall semester there, you can see we had a session in August with the writing across the curriculum group, and there were about 50 or so faculty there. As part of that, we asked them, what topics do you want to learn about with generative AI? And not surprising, given our campus interest in sustainability, that was a topic that folks were interested in. And so when we were in the Teaching and Learning Center, we're thinking about programming and things we wanted to do, we saw this as a natural opportunity to partner with something that already exists on campus and share some information and some learning about that. So that is why I am here today. And thank you for the invitation to Sustainability Council and the others that were mentioned. I appreciate this opportunity to share. After today's session, if you're interested in learning more about generative AI in general, we have a whole collection of resources, including a website that has dedicated to generative AI topics. I'm hoping a copy of this presentation will also make its way there when we're done. Speaking of which, are we recording at this point? Awesome. If you like to listen, we have 2 podcast episodes with a third on the way. If you like to watch, we have recordings from previous webinars that are available. If you like to read, that website's got links to lots of different resources. If you want an introduction that's a little more interactive or something you can use with students, the Navigating Digital Learning site has a basic tutorial that folks can engage with. And finally, if you want some one-on-one support to talk about these topics as they relate to your context, you can always reach out to an instructional designer from the Teaching and Learning Center. So, I don't know about all of you, but we are more than a year into this AI craze, and I, someone who spends time on this, I'm still feeling quite overwhelmed at needing to stay current with a topic that's changing at really what feels like a ridiculous pace. So even when I focus on a specific aspect, which in this case is sustainability considerations, there's still just an overwhelming number of components to consider. But I did see this quote in an AI presentation not that long ago, and I think it's a really good reminder for us that we do not have to stay current on every little thing. As long as we're trying to engage as we can on the topic, we'll be all right. So thanks for being here and spending some of your time to learn a little bit more about generative AI tools. One more quote. Another reason we're doing this presentation connects to this quote. Take a second to read that. I'm going to be sharing both some positive and negative aspects of AI today, and I think this quote is a healthy reminder for us that we do have the power to shape how these tools are used, and we can create some better outcomes if we make some wise decisions that both can benefit ourselves and our greater world. So with that said, here's our plan for our time together. I do want to cover some definitions, make sure we're talking about the same thing. I'm going to spend a little more time than you probably realize talking about how these models work, and that's to set up some conversation about their energy use, their resource use, and some of those pieces. And I do want to end on a more positive note with some ideas folks have about how these tools may actually help us in some different sustainability topics. So that's where we're headed today. So, definition of artificial intelligence. It is a branch of computer science that aims to create intelligent systems capable of perceiving their environment, understanding and interpreting data, learning from experience, and making decisions or predictions. It involves the development of algorithms, machine learning models, and technologies that simulate or mimic human cognitive abilities, things like problem solving, pattern recognition, natural language processing, and decision making. It's in a lot of our stuff already. When you ask Alexa what the weather is, or ask Siri to give you directions, or say, hey, Google, play my playlist, there's AI components to those tools. It's helping decide what video recommendations you get from a streaming service, or knowing when to send an email to your spam versus your inbox. And it's even helping us with things like parallel parking, autonomous driving, or language translation in real time. Generative AI is a subset of that larger artificial intelligence concept. And so these are just two different definitions around generative AI. So take a second to read those. So here are some of the popular generative AI tools. I think ChatGPT is probably one of the most popular, commonly known ones, but these are some of the other large, well-known generative AI tools. The two that are marked with the Westchester logo are two that you should be able to access using your Westchester credentials, because we already have other products from those same companies. But this is a good time to point out that the university has not set any global AI policies, nor has made any official recommendations on which tools to use or not use. The policy is basically, it's an open space right now. It's left up to individual instructors as to how they want to approach using these tools. Another example of the pace of change, literally this past Thursday, Google changed the name of their product and started charging for the newer version. I think the BARD version is still out there, but I mean, this is an example of how quickly things are changing. Make a presentation and they're like, nope, just kidding, change the name. Here are some academic focused AI tools. Elicit is an example of one that has the potential to really transform the way we might do literature reviews, because it can search what's already there, specific research questions, give you 10 things they think are most related, including summaries of those in very quick time. And there are other tools like Elicit out there already. The Nolje, the one in the middle, will take any reading or video and automatically generate interactive activities to kind of test your understanding of whether you read or watched it. And Conmingo is the AI that Khan Academy has put into their tool. And I mentioned that one because they are supposedly doing a slightly better job of data privacy and data protection than some of the other tools that are out there. I share these to demonstrate that you can find an AI tool for a lot of different use cases. So if you have a particular use case that you're interested in, these two websites are a good place to kind of poke around and see what might be out there. There's an AI for that is one, and Futurepedia is the other one. Now, I took both of these screenshots in early November, right? And then about a month later, when I was getting ready to present a different presentation, I went back and checked the numbers. So you can see in a month, so from November to early December, it gives you a sense of how the pace changed. And then I checked again a couple of weeks ago, and that's where the counts were. So again, like the pace of change, the amount of tools has been growing considerably in the last year. Really gives you a sense of the pace of change. So how do these tools work? No one really knows. And what I mean by that is if you ask someone to explain every single step one of these tools makes, from the initial prompt, all the work it does to the final product, you cannot look at each individual step and decision that the model makes. It's not transparent. The best we can do is kind of give you an overall perspective of how the model is working. And I'm going to do that here in a second. So they really, in some respects, are very, there's a big black hole in the middle of them, trying to understand how it gets from A to B. So let's look at the big picture, and you might start to get a sense of why that is the case. So I'm going to focus on text generative AI tools and the explanation, but the process is very similar for media AI tools, things that'll generate video, pictures, audio. The process is similar. So at the kind of a big picture level, the tools are assigning a numerical vector notation to each word that allows the words and their relationships to be mapped out. So a very simplistic idea is longitude and latitude on the Earth. You can use those those numerical notations of longitude and latitude to find a spot. And then based on other longitude and latitude, you can like talk about their relationship, like they're at the same latitude or they're at the same longitude. So in this example here, cat will be close in vector space to things like dog and kitten because there's a relationship between those words. That mathematical notation then is what allows the tools to make the predictions that create the content that we see. So that happens, let's use an example to talk about how that happens. This is the start of a sentence. John wants his bank to cash the. That's going to go into what Lee and Trott, who are the guys I quoted just a moment ago, say is a transformer. And it's the first transformer is going to identify the verbs. So wants and cash. That information is coded mathematically, and then it's going to get passed on to the next transformer. Now that next transformer, maybe its job is to add additional clarity. So it's going to identify the pronoun his and the word bank as a financial institution rather than like banking the shot of a basketball off the backboard. So it'll encode that information and pass it along to the next transformer. Now that process of identifying something and passing along, in the older version of ChatGPT, there were 96 layers. So this is just 2. So imagine that happening 94 more times. Okay. So those notations, those mathematical notations get very complex, but it allows tools to hold on to a lot of information describing relationships. So again, ChatGPT 3, the old version, had over 12,000 dimensions. So that's a lot of space to track data. Let's say that that example we were using had reached the 60th layer, the 60th transformer. At that point, ChatGPT might have a numerical notation that's containing this information that you see here related to the word John. So this is all the information that's describing John in that sentence. And remember, this is information for just a single word in that sentence. Another word like Cheryl might have different information, but some of that math is set up in such a way that it shows the relationship between Cheryl and John, that they are married. Ultimately, the goal is trying to encode enough information for each word that it can predict accurately what's going to be the next word.
So who does that?
It's all in the computer. I'll get there. Yeah. All right. So inside of those transformers, so now I'm kind of getting down a little further, 2 things happen. First, the different word the different words and their numerical notations kind of communicate with each other to find those connections. So when they find a connection, like John and Cheryl having a relationship, that mathematical information is transferred in a way that shows that connection for the computer to then make predictions on later. Then there's a second step happening, what they call feed forward, where each word is analyzed and a prediction is made. So at each transformer level, it's making a prediction. They're not very accurate early on because they don't have a lot of data. But as the data increases, as they go through the layers, they get to a point where the predictions get very good. Each layer in ChatGPT-3, old version of ChatGPT, had 1.2 billion weight parameters. So like that's a lot of data and a single layer, and there were 90-something layers. In order to get all that math to work, where it can make those predictions, the models have to be trained on data. So there's a training process that occurs. The example that Leon Trott used in the article I'm kind of summarizing here is how we adjust the temperature for the shower, or we turn the cold and the hot a little bit to get it just right. So we turn them on, might be a little too cold, so we tweak it, temperature changes, we're like, okay, it's good. But with AI, instead of 2 knobs, you have 50,000 knobs and a whole lot of like pipes and valves. It's just lots and lots of variables to take into consideration. And they try a combination, see if they get it right. If it doesn't, they adjust and they go again. And that's what's happening in the training process. Training a model as big as ChatGPT-3, old model, requires repeating this process billions of times. And it's once for each word of training data. So OpenAI, which is the company that creates ChatGPT-3, estimated that it took more than 300 billion trillion calculations to train the model. So to give you some context, it was months of work for dozens of high-end computer chips. So lots and lots of data going through lots and lots of processing over a significant period of time. So that was my quick synopsis of Leon Trott's article. If you want to get into a little bit more of the nuance, check it out. I think it's a decent one for understanding how models work, and I'm not the only one that thinks this is a good kind of primer for those of us that are not supercomputer tech savvy. Now, why did I take 10 to 15 minutes to set all that up? It's so that you can start to get a sense of the massive, and I mean massive, amount of computational power that's needed to train and run these large language models, these generative AI tools. And all that processing takes place in large data centers where a lot of our cloud computing infrastructure resides. The International Energy Association estimates that data centers as a whole, so all of our internet computer use that goes through data centers is somewhere between 1 and 1.3% of the electricity used in the world in 2022. That number did not include cryptocurrency mining, which is a whole separate use of electricity. And that's pretty resource intensive too. So same group, data centers and data transmission are around 1% of our greenhouse gas emissions worldwide. So as I've been thinking about it, I'm using that 1% of energy in the world, 1% of greenhouse gas emissions. It's kind of the way I've been thinking about it. Now that's the whole internet digital communications infrastructure. AI is a part of that. And the number that they cited is it's somewhere between 240 and 340 what are called terawatt hours of power. So question for everyone here in the audience. What percentage of Google's energy use in 2021 went towards AI tools, machine learning? So 2021, before ChatGPT took off, and it's just Google. So I'm kind of stepping us down from that 1% number at this point. What do we think? What percentage? Take a guess. Tiny. What tiny? How tiny are you thinking?
0.5%.
0.5%. I want to hear some other guesses here. Not everybody's on this. 5%. What do we think? 3, 10, 50? Adam went high. All right. So somewhere between 10 and 15%, nice job, of their energy use went to machine learning in 2021. So this was before AI really took off. And I remember Google is just one part of the overall internet and digital communications infrastructure. So that had me wondering, what's the energy use of the other big tech companies? So I found a report, 2021, that's that column there, the first column. And then I was able to hunt down their self-reported data for 2022 and added that in. And I used that same 15% and just made an assumption. What happens if I apply that across all the companies? That is a rough assumption. I have not been able to find the specific numbers for companies telling us how much is going to generative AI. So this third column here is my rough assumption. If we took their amounts, did 15%, how much would that be? I think it's 15. I don't think I did the 10. I'm pretty sure I did 15. And then I use that 340 terawatt hours that we heard about the whole internet infrastructure to do a calculation to give me a rough sense, right? How much energy is getting used by just the big five, right? It's 5, 6, 5, yep. Not every company that's doing AI work, not all the digital infrastructure, just the big ones. And this was in 2022. So again, like ChatGPT came out in November of 2022. So probably what we're seeing here is the training side, not a whole lot of the use side yet. And we don't have numbers for 23 yet. So AI energy use from those companies is 3.7% of 1% of our global CO2 emissions. So it's tiny, but it's not insignificant either. It's an amount. And that number is definitely going up. We know that for sure. If I did the smaller 240 number, it would be 5% of 1%. So that gives you the range somewhere in there of how much, rough estimate, how much Gen AI is contributing to some of these things. But it is still putting demand growth on our systems. This map shows the currently operating data centers in the United States and their estimated power demand. That's the bluish green, along with planned data centers and their estimated power demand. That is the yellow. And I definitely see a lot of yellow of planned data centers, and their energy demand is the size of the circle. So there's going to continue to be growth for data centers, and that is driven in part by these tools and their large power and computing needs. And if you're curious, the light gray shading on the map, I'm pretty sure is the power grid regions. So the different regions of the power grid and the way that it's divided. Because Texas is its own thing mostly, which is, we've heard about that in the news. So for us on the East Coast, a pretty substantial amount of our internet traffic runs through Northern Virginia. And specifically Loudoun County, which is to the west of DC. So as we're considering the sustainability impacts, as we think about the ways these tools are causing change, is that need for new data centers and the electricity that goes to them. And I thought this was a pretty significant growth. AI is a part of that. The internet is still growing. It's not all of the AI impact, but it is some. 500% in 10 years, not even, it's a lot. And the power needs for AI are so significant that Microsoft is exploring setting up their own nuclear reactors. And that's not an insignificant thing. As a son of someone who worked for a nuclear reactor power company, I understand the logistics that go into managing and supporting those. And the head of OpenAI, which is the company behind ChatGPT, has also said they're going to need a lot more power if they want to continue to see breakthroughs. Now, I think that individual who's the head of that company may have some unrealistic understanding of the energy markets, but I think I've made the case at this point that these tools are very energy heavy users. So what's all that energy going to? It splits out primarily between training and our use. That's what the application is. That's individuals' use of the different models with a little bit for experimentation there. Recent data from Meta and Google indicates that training is at 20 to 40 and then 60 to 70 for the application. So let's look a little bit at the training side. The more parameters a model has, the more energy it needs to run the calculation. So that goes back to that early explanation that I went through. ChatGPT 3, old model, had 1.2 billion weight parameters. So if you add that up, if you multiply that by 96 layers, you get pretty close to that 175 billion parameters there. On the old model, we're on like 4.5 at this point, and it's got more. This chart is kind of showing over time as the models have evolved, how the parameter counts have been going up and up and up and up. An earlier version of that Google model, the BERT model, that only had about 110 parameters, consumed the energy needed for a round trip transcontinental flight for one person. So if you multiply it by three round trips, that's at 340 million. You can start to see how this has impacts. And that's just training. That's not use. That's 20% of their predicted power consumption. From an environmental impact perspective, though, where the energy comes from for training the models matters in terms of its impact, which I think makes sense. A group of researchers demonstrated that the models could be trained for a very small environmental impact if you were paying attention to where your power came from. You were using renewable sources, you were running the calculations at times where you had more access to, say, solar power. That could really drive down the impact. So the folks that did the Bloom model at the bottom of this 4-part here, 30 tons is way less than some of these other, and they were intentionally trying to be really careful about the power that they used. And the big tech companies are trying to offset their power needs with sustainable options. Some are better than others, from what I can tell. Microsoft's consideration of nuclear. Nuclear is a cleaner option than coal or natural gas. It still has waste byproduct. So they are working towards trying to be wiser and where their energy choices are coming from in terms of impact. Are they there yet? It depends on each company. I was poking through their different sustainability reports to start getting a sense of how they're doing. I actually think Microsoft, just on impressions, and again, I'm not an expert, is doing a slightly better job than some of the other ones. And Microsoft is where a good chunk of the ChatGPT OpenAI infrastructure resides. So there are also folks in these spaces committed to helping drive down energy costs. This Code Carbon group built a very simple software package that folks can activate as they're doing their AI work, and it tracks emissions and gives them data that they can make some decisions off of. I thought that was an interesting thing that they had going and set up to kind of help measure their environmental impacts. All right, so that was just the 20 to 40%. Let's talk a little bit about the application side, our use of the model, like when we're asking ChatGPT to give us some sort of response. So I have another question for the audience here. Generating an image using a powerful AI model takes as much energy as which of these options? And you can just show me with your finger, 1, 2, 3, or 4. What do we think? 4, 1, 3, 1. 1. Okay. Here's what my source said. So taking your smartphone from 0 to 100 to generate one AI image. The team that was doing this research found that using large models to create outputs was far more energy intensive than using smaller AI models that were tailored for more specific tasks. So the reason being the AI models use a lot more energy because the large ones are using more energy because they're trying to do more than one thing, like summarize, classify, generate, rather than models that have been trained to do more specific tasks. So this is an image from of a chat I actually did back in June around Father's Day. I was trying to find jokes for my dad's Father's Day card. And at the time I was experimenting, trying things out. I don't think these jokes are actually particularly good. It was not a good combination of Star Trek and Star Wars. But as I'm looking back on that now with some of this reading and learning I've done about the sustainability impacts, one of the things I've started asking myself before I run an AI query is this query worth that cost, right? Do I want to be using an AI tool to generate jokes? I don't know. I don't know that that's a cost I probably want to be spending. Do I want to do something from a productivity standpoint that helps me help faculty do a better job of teaching students? maybe that's worth the cost. But I at least want to start asking myself that question. This is a chart from another set of research that shows the emission measurements for various types of generative AI tasks you can run. So create an image is definitely towards the upper bounds there, but summarizing text, which I think we see a lot of, and then just to the left of that, the green is the text generation, which we see a lot of. You can get a sense there of the range of emissions related to the power needed for those types of things. So I spent a lot of time talking about electricity because that's where I could find the most data that was readily available, but there are other impacts of these tools. All of those data centers, they run on chips and processors, and those things have material costs. They have to be made somewhere. And the makers of AI chips are seeing record growth right now, and the demand for their product is through the roof. So you know that there's material costs going into having to generate all those chips to then run all those calculations and all those queries. The technology piece, those chips and processors, they require more hardware than other types of computing. The hardware is also tends to be used up faster from what my sources were saying. It also appears that some of these companies are cycling through that hardware more quickly than they were other types of computer equipment, which means the replacement cycle is more intensive than those other types of computing. So this leads to more e-waste and continued kind of pressure on rare earth mining and the other elements that are needed to create that hardware. I was not able to find any really good statistics to back that information up, other than a couple of news sources. But at a big picture view, it makes sense to me. If we need more powerful chips and we need more of them, that means we're getting more out of the ground. And if they're going through them faster, yeah. Another consideration is the water that's needed both on the power generation side, but also on the cooling side for all these chips. When they're running processes, that's heat generation that they have to cool off. A medium-sized data center, 15 megawatts, uses as much water as 3 average-sized hospitals or more than 2 18-hole golf courses. So when we're using generative AI tools, those also come at a cost to our water resources. And as more data centers, like I showed earlier, coming online, that's more demand for water. For example, Microsoft's water consumption has surged 34% from 2021 to 2022. And folks are speculating that the generative AI is likely a large portion of that increase. Again, I don't want this to seem all doom and gloom because companies are trying to work on that. They recognize that that's a concern. And so they're looking for ways to be more water efficient, to recapture evaporation and things like that, to reuse water sources. Stormwater ponds is one of the ways I've saw that they're thinking about trying to gather more water for use in their systems. All right, so one more set of AI concerns, and we'll get to some positives. There's also some social dynamics to consider as it relates to AI. A couple of other negative aspects. Models may have been trained on content without the permission of copyright holders of that content. I think that one we've heard a lot about, but there's that to me is an open question that has a lot of legal aspects that need to get sorted out. It's not just on the training side too. Who owns, if a model creates something, who owns that? The courts thus far have said it's not copyrightable. So there's some real open questions there. Their use, the use of models can discriminate against communities. For example, the data that a model has been trained on, what happens if it has, for example, a Western bend, right? Andy Famiglietti, who's been doing a lot of work in the generative AI space, ran a series of prompts to generate a sequence of stories. And one of the things he saw in those stories was this repeated use of certain surnames, which were not particularly diverse. And some of the other UN reporting on this topic has talked about how the global South is not well represented in a lot of the training data that's been used to generate these models as well. So there's some real possibilities there about discriminating against communities that can occur. I've alluded to the AI infrastructure uses a lot of metal and plastic and power to make it run. And then last, there's definitely bias in some of these models, particularly on the image generation side. You have very poor training on darker faces and an overemphasis of white males in certain professions showing up in some of these models. Now, that type of work can be corrected if you do a better job of what data you're training on, what data you're putting into the model. But there's still a lot of work to be done there to correct that. All right, so that was a lot of not great stuff. So let's end on a more positive note here. These tools are incredible prediction engines. They are able to look at patterns in a way that we human beings cannot. That's part of what has made the text generation one so crazy to us, is it's basically like understands the patterns of the ways we communicate as human beings. I didn't have this in the presentation, but this is an example. If you were to prompt an AI tool in December, the output was showing up as not as good as if you prompted in a different month, because it had learned we are less productive in December because of the holidays. Like that's crazy to me that it's been able to pick up on that. So to correct it in December, you just say, respond to this as if it's the month of April, and then you give it the prompt. And that prompts over time were better than if you just left it as normal. That's bonkers, but that's the type of pattern recognition that it can do for us as humans in the ways that we communicate. AI has the potential to play a significant role in helping to mitigate global warming and reducing greenhouse gas emissions through its ability to help us with things like automating data processing, expediting knowledge acquisition, and enhancing decision-making processes. So helping us accelerate some of those things. I'm like, I do have research articles where I got these quotes from. I don't know about that one. That one seems a little pie in the sky to me a little bit, but it's something that folks have suggested as a possibility. I do see more applicability in things like climate analysis and forecasting, aiding us in understanding how our human activities are interacting with natural phenomena. That makes more sense to me. And I'm glad that the person that has some experience in weather is shaking his head in affirmation on that one. Yeah. This one also makes more sense to me, that it can help us with energy conservation by automating things like energy audits, identifying energy saving opportunities in buildings. Again, looking at those patterns we might not be able to pick up on, and optimizing renewable energy systems design. It has the potential to help us improve the efficiency of carbon capture and storage by automating the design process. And so those are some things that have come out in the literature thus far. And I can see that as distinct possibilities. This one's a little bit further in the future, in my opinion, but one upside potentially is that asking a chatbot can be a more direct way to get the information than using a search engine. So as these companies learn to get more efficient with their AI search queries, getting you right to what you're looking for has the potential to be more efficient than scrolling through your Google searches and hunting down the exact piece of information that you're looking for. That I think is a future possibility. And if we can work on bringing computation to where green energy is more abundant and scheduling computation to take advantage of things like solar power, I do think there's a real possibility there to reduce emissions significantly compared to using fossil fuels, which could help with some of that heavy AI use. So for us here at Westchester, as we think about generative AI tools going forward, we should seek to use models that make more of an effort to engage with renewable energy. So I think that's definitely something to take to IT to say, as you're thinking about these tools and where we're getting them from, can we look into where these data centers are getting their power? Another recommendation is that we use models that already exist instead of creating new ones, because they've already been trained. We've already paid the training cost. Why do we need to pay a training cost again? And I think, again, that's relevant for our Westchester decision-making around AI. If we are like, hey, we want to build our own AI, well, why? Like, what value is that going to bring that we could already get from a model that already exists? And if we do decide to build our own model, making sure that we don't overtrain it and make sure it's the right size for the work that we're trying to do. And again, to try to save some of that power cost and make it more efficient. So why is this so hard to figure out? We still don't have clear definitions on what these tools can and cannot do. And that idea is called the jagged frontier. So the yellow dotted line is equally difficult tasks. The pink circles are the different tasks. Some tasks AI can do, right? The pink squiggle line is what AI can do. Can do, can't do, right on the edge. What makes this challenging is that the models are not static. They are continuing to grow and learn and evolve, kind of like our students. So that squiggle line is changing over time. So something that AI might not have been good at a couple of weeks ago, it may have figured out at this point. There may be a generative AI tool that's been trained and set up that can now do that thing. So there is definitely some promise that these tools can bring some efficiencies for us, can help us find patterns we wouldn't find on our own. But we have to balance that, I think, against the costs and the environmental impacts of using these tools. And so that comes back to my question that I asked, is this query worth it? Just taking that half second to ask yourself, like, is this worth what I'm about to put into the world? And I want to end here with one more quote from one of your Westchester colleagues. And what I hope I was able to accomplish a small portion of today is kind of laying the groundwork to keep thinking critically about these tools and their impacts. If you look back across my presentation, I presented a model for approaching generative AI in your own contexts. Taught a little bit of basics. I gave you some resources, but we spent most of our time and energy kind of critically evaluating and trying to understand the tools and their impacts. And I think that's a good approach to take with our students because they are evolving and they are changing. So with that said, and 15 minutes to go, I'll go ahead and open it up for questions and discussion at this point.
Thank you.
All right, Adam. Okay.
Cool, but also sad things I learned from media and island trip. So I'm an officer of the European business very big with the tax laws. A lot of the data centers in Ireland are actually relocated because of climate change to cooler locations. So they may have been, say, located outside of Dublin in a major city area that gets cooler temperatures than we're used to, but significantly less below 90 degree days, extremely fair. Seeing more and more of those impact temperatures in data centers, and thus they're picking significantly cooler locations within the same place. Say now built your data center, they're often extremely remote, not the infrastructure spec. So I just found that that's considering that environmental impact, but also like really it's for your own benefit in a lot of cases. So they're obviously aware, thinking about it, but how forward facing it versus how best serving for them is that interesting, like that. Perspective. My question was about, I'm guessing you're kind of aware of the New York Times lawsuit. So the New York Times is suing OpenAI, I believe, because of claiming copyright on those articles that were written by the journalists so that models used to train them. From the media perspective, it's arguably probably the best example of like a seminal case. Looking back at some of the most famous cases in common media, like this is probably the next one. Any thoughts on what you think might emerge or what you know about the situation, or just kind of watching?
So for the online crowd, Adam's question was about the New York Times suing OpenAI, and he was because OpenAI used New York Times articles as part of their training data. He's asking for my thoughts or perspectives. And copyright law is out of date at this point. Like there needs to be a reconsideration of that process. And so the interesting thing I saw was that a similar thing happened when the printing press came on the scene. But beyond that, I don't know how to respond to some of this because New York Times put their content out there. They're not monetizing off the articles specifically, but they did use it in a way the New York Times is probably not happy about. And this is why I say I don't think copyright
Yeah.
law is able to handle this situation. And yeah. And it's only going to benefit the organization in that the tool can generate an output that's benefiting another individual. And I'd be curious too how the paying versus not paying dynamic comes into play, because if it's benefiting greater society, you're starting to move into, yeah, I'm not an expert in any of these things, so it is fascinating. Any other thoughts in the room? I don't want to be the only expert here. Yeah.
It's also interesting, just like to think about, like, obviously that's like an organizational thing, but something that I've like thought about for this, like I like to paint, so like in my art, thinking of like generative AI art and like the conflict concerns for like individual artists who put their work out there, and then AI can, scour the internet for art and like basically make something out of like all that information, and how that like would affect like individual artists who are out there sharing their work, and then having their work like unknowingly be used to like generate AI images of art. And that was always something I was like, oh, that's really like interesting to think about. And then how would you like handle that? And how would you, especially because you can't like trace each step that AI took to like make that final image. It's like, how would you track it and know that AI used your stuff?
Your art is not, this is where it gets really wonky for me too, because your art is not completely independently yours. You are influenced by other people's art in the way that you do your own style. So like, where do we find the line of it becomes yours versus it's not? Is even another part of that question of the copyright consideration that just blows my mind. I don't think there's going to be easy ways to track it. Just based on what I've been reading and seeing. And again, I'm not the expert. There might be some technical method that can go into making sure your stuff is used appropriately, but I think at the end of the day, the tools are getting too good at creating. Yeah.
Yeah, sampling music, and like you can sample someone else's song as long as you credit them.
Or it's educational,
Or
or
it's like, if you like, people will sue, like artists, like musical artists will try to sue each other for using, oh, you use the same melody. There are only so many melodies that exist, combinations of melodies you can use. You can't sue me for using the same one as you. Like deal with that.
I do think citation is going to carry some more weight, like acknowledging where you're coming, like where things are coming from, what you're using. There's an article kind of about, I think it's post-plagiarism, that we've been sharing at least a little bit in the Teaching and Learning Center that talks is that something that's going to enhance or increase in emphasis. Cheryl has her hand up on the online, so I want to make sure she has a chance to ask her question. Go for it, Cheryl.
Well, thanks. And this is, I have so many thoughts. Actually, my first thing I wanted to say though, is it's an AI fake that I am married to John. I just want to set that rumor to rest at this point. I am not.
I'll be honest, Cheryl, that example comes right out of the article, but as I was writing it, I was like, ooh, I wonder how Cheryl's going to react to this.
Well, I have a question about like paywall, putting this stuff behind paywalls and, further leading to the, socioeconomic kind of differentiation of who has access to what kind of knowledge and power. But I think my first question, because the most striking thing to me was that Microsoft is thinking about building nuclear power plants. I think it was Microsoft, not Google.
No, it's Microsoft that's
Microsoft.
Nuclear power
And
with Gen AI.
yeah, so I mean, I'm sure they're thinking about going that direction just because storage, right? And electricity storage isn't available at this point on a large enough scale for that timing thing you were talking about, like people wanting to do various kinds of computing overnight, right? Or automated systems going overnight. So I was just wondering if you had run across in your research any information about those big five or big six, putting in other types of more sustainable infrastructure, like their own renewables, or their own, or throwing a lot of money into storage research, just to help with this kind of problem?
So I didn't get deep enough to know. I do remember, not related to Gen I, reading that some of the organizations were trying to figure out a way to put their servers underwater to take advantage of the cooling function that, I mean, water is one of the best insulators. So the problem is, if you try to do that in the ocean, salt is terribly corrosive. So they're like, that's an interesting engineering challenge. But no, I would encourage you, if you're interested in learning more, to dig into their sustainability reports, because there is like tiered depths to them where you can get into. And just the way I engage with them, I did see that they were talking about the renewal projects that they're putting in themselves for energy generation, and then also the pieces that they're buying. But storage is an interesting question. I hadn't really thought about that side of the equation. So thanks, Cheryl.
I appreciate that you started with that quote about the mystery and the feeling of threat of AI, because that has been, it's true of anything. It's true of any new tool that we don't quite understand yet. You did make the case that this is potentially a very powerful tool. So I think your attention to both the nuts and bolts, energy and materials demand of developing, training, using, doing further research on these systems has been really helpful to do a little bit of demystification. And I like that you ended with some of the potential uses of AI for addressing some of our most significant environmental, social, economic challenges. That all makes sense. You did sort of sidestep the dystopian scenarios that often come up, and I think that's a legitimate way. Yet AI has already been used for deceptive purposes and manipulative purposes. So I don't have a specific question, but I just wonder if, in doing the research you've done, you have a sense of how we collectively, society, can use these tools for those positive benefits and discourage the manipulative, deceptive purposes that it's really well adapted to.
So a couple of thoughts there. There's a good TED Talk, I think it's a TED Talk, where she talks about, like, we have real challenges with AI right now. Why are we focused on the potential Terminator down the road? And so that has been in my head in terms of trying to stay focused on like the things that are impacting now, which I think you're alluding to, right? The like ability to generate phone calls where you think you're talking to your CEO who's telling you to wire a bunch of money, and it turns out it was just an AI generated fake. And so now you've given away a bunch of money for your company. Like, that is like, oh my gosh. And that's just one example of some of the many ways that these can, and I don't have great answers other than like, it's kind of up to us, right? In how we choose to engage and use these tools, and the folks that have them and are making them available, what are they doing to be responsible? And how, like, to me, it's always like, how are you being responsible in connection with the money you're trying to make off of it? Because we mentioned copyright law is not there. There's not a lot of good legal ramifications in place yet here either.
Brad's question is related to something I'm wondering about. So there are ethical guardrails on some of these tools.
Kind of.
A bunch of friends and I were testing out ChatGPT. Said, let's generate a story, blah 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 blah, and create a character that is stereotypical, whatever. And it came back and it said, we don't want to perpetuate stereotypes. And it kind of put the kibosh on the whole thing until we reword it.
I was going to say that you reword it like, well, we're just pretending, and that's a tool that's already, like, you can also make your own version of these without too much. Like, you have to have some expertise and some dollars, like a couple hundred, but you can build your own AI model. And there's no guardrails on that when you build it, right?
But somebody put that guardrail into the
Yes,
program
yes.
and,
We in the TLC were looking at Grammarly, which is a very powerful AI tool that I don't think a lot of people realize. And they were experimenting a little bit with something, I think it might have been race related. And Grammarly was basically like, we don't do that in our AI. So like, and our use was very like normal in an education environment. It might have been, I can't remember the exact example at the moment. But we couldn't even go there because of the guardrail was really firm in that particular tool. But I'm sure if we took the same thing to a different tool, we would be able to do what we were hoping to do. And there's 16,000 tool options out there, right?
Just like social media, there's something that have controls on.
That
word controls, but he bought it.
Yeah, and then now there's not.
Right.
And had to leave that tool alone. I think if there were good answers, that person would be making a lot of money right now. And I think it's really a reflection of our humanity. You're going to have both the good and the bad that come out of it.
We have a Manichean AI Armageddon in the future.
I don't know. If we blow up our planet first, it might not happen. But I mean, these are real questions that I know folks are wrestling with and we're coming across and hearing about. And that's why I shared all the resources at the beginning. Because these conversations evolve too. My understanding of the tools has definitely gotten has improved over the last year of just spending time with it. That's the other piece I would love people to take away. Like, don't put your head in the sand. Engage as you can, but pay attention to the things that you care about.
Well, we're almost at 1 o'clock. We've gone over a bit. I hope those who are online have logged off if you've had to. But we're going to end here. One more thank you for our speaker, Dr. Thomas.
Appreciate the invite. And again, thanks to all the TLC folks in the background there that have contributed to this. So
Thank you.